Hello again, I'm John, and this is part 2 of how I built this workshop in my backyard. In part 1, we looked at the planning of the shed through the framing. In this video, we're going to look at the sheathing of the walls and roof. Any questions? Put them in the comments. Okay, let's get to it. We now join the installation of the sheathing already in progress. I've already put in the first 2 sheets symmetrically across the door opening, which is centered on the end wall. Then I cut out the door opening and set the pieces aside, which I will use later for making the doors. The Cheap Sheds plans recommend installing the siding on the walls before raising them. This makes it easier to install the panels, but makes the wall so much heavier for one person to lift. I will have a layer of sheathing in addition to siding, so I've traded heavy lifting for inconvenient assembly. The logical solution would have been to get a second person to help. Eventually, I will add a mini split air conditioning unit since I will use this shed as a workshop and not just a storage space. This calls for additional insulation and moisture control. I will put up sheathing, house wrap, and siding on the outside and fiberglass insulation in the walls and ceiling. So far, the weather has been pretty dry, until now. Rain isn't a problem if there is time for things to dry out. The problem is really the dirt surrounding the shed. All the mulch surrounding the old shed was cleared away for excavating the concrete pad. The exposed dirt is pretty clean as far as dirt goes, and is no problem to work in while dry. Last night's rain transformed it to mud. I still had the scrap wood from the previous shed, so I laid out sections of the old floor to serve as a walkway over the mud. I want to place the sheathing panels so they overlap the pad by about an inch. I can't screw a ledger board into the concrete, so I use stacks of wood, a panel lifter, and clamps to position each panel where I wanted, then tack them in place with a few screws. You can see by how much fiddling I do how a ledger board or a second person would have made the job much easier. In a perfect world, the edges of the panels would meet squarely at the corners. In my world, not so much. They're close enough and definitely not worth tearing apart to correct. There will be trim on the outside corners to hide any imperfections. For the gable end trusses, I pieced together sheathing from whatever cutoffs I had left over from wall and gussets. I did not have any full sheets left. I would have had full sheets left over if I didn't rip so many down ahead of time into 12-inch strips for the gussets. I ended up not needing to use all those strips, so I had a pile of 12-inch by 96-inch pieces left to work with. Like I did for attaching the gussets on the other trusses, I used construction adhesive and nails, but covered the whole side of the truss. At this point, the wall sheathing is only screwed in a few places for each panel. I am now unscrewing each one, applying construction adhesive to the studs, and nailing them in place permanently. I suppose if I had more experience or more confidence, I would have done this in the first place. When you see me with a measuring tape, I think I was confirming where the studs were so I could nail in the correct place in the middle of a panel. One panel has the layout lines facing outward. There's no particular reason for that other than that's the way I cut and hung the panel. It does trigger my OCD whenever I see this clip though. The lines on OSB are used for nailing guides as they are spaced to line up with standard stud or joist spacing. The line side is also textured for safety when used for flooring or roofing. For my purpose, it does not matter which side faces outward, as there is no structural difference. The end wall at the peak is taller than a single piece of siding can cover. Therefore, I will need an additional section of siding vertically. I need to make sure the upper section of siding overlaps the lower section enough to prevent any water from getting in behind the panels as it drips down. This area will be protected by the overhang, but it is not impossible for it to be rained upon under the right conditions. The gable end truss needs to be offset outward by the thickness of the siding, about 7/16 inches. The upper siding will then overlap the lower by about an inch. I attach placeholder strips of siding to set up the truss position, and after some extensive fiddling around, I managed to nail down the truss. I think all the fiddling had something to do with making sure the truss was centered, and then realizing the truss was not exactly symmetrical. I used the same process for the opposite gable end truss, hopefully with less fiddling. There is no video proof of this, however, so you'll just have to trust me. Now that all the trusses are in place, I can attach the end boards. These will go past the gable ends about a foot to accommodate the flying trusses that extend the roof, creating the overhangs. What I am not showing you is how much the ends of the trusses were not flush with one another. This was essentially a result of slightly asymmetrical trusses, even though I had used a template. I wasn't careful enough when laying out the trusses in the template to make sure the assemblies were as symmetrical as possible. There were also some boards that were less than straight. On top of that, I should have checked for plumb as I attached each truss. At the time, I assumed all the trusses were identical and symmetrical. I did not want the eaves of the roof to be wavy, so I strung a plumb line between the gable end trusses and either shifted each truss to one side or the other, or shaved off some wood as necessary until everything lined up on each side of the shed. Like the walls, I attached the end boards with 1/4-inch power lag screws. As I mentioned before, the flying trusses are not support structures but serve to extend the roof to create overhangs. Once I figured out a way to hoist the trusses into place and hold them there, I screwed them to the truss end boards and walls. Clamps are your friends when working solo. I had to shave material off the ends where they met at the center to make a snug fit. Mostly to satisfy my OCD than anything else, since it will be covered up by trim. I opted for 3/4 inch plywood for the roof. Probably overkill for such a small building, but I spaced the trusses at 24 inches. If I had used 16-inch spacing, I may have gone with 1/2 inch plywood. The first panel took a little while to install for some reason, but once that was in place, the others went in quicker. Keep an eye out for a visitor who came by to inspect my work. I believe it was a banded tussock moth. Once the roof sheathing was in place, I could attach trim to cover the exposed framing at the roofline. I videoed only one side, so imagine me doing the exact same thing on the other 3 sides. Now that most of the shed is enclosed, I can actually use it as a workshop as long as I can run an extension cord from the house. No doors yet, so I used some plastic to keep out the rain. I designed the shed to have 8-foot walls, giving me plenty of overhead space for lighting and whatever I wanted to mount to the walls. The shallow roof pitch doesn't leave a lot of attic space, but that may be a good thing, as I tend to accumulate junk in places that are out of view. I'll be installing enough 15 and 20 amp electrical outlets so that wherever I'm standing, or however I've arranged the workshop, I have easy access to power.